Welcome to Let's Talk Security, where we spotlight cybersecurity companies and give an inside look at the people and technology behind the latest advancements in the industry. We discuss a wide range of topics with subject matter experts about today's cybersecurity challenges and how their solutions are helping organizations like yours maintain a continuous security posture. Please welcome the host of Let's Talk Security, Jeff Wolach.
I'm joined today by Stephen Frethem, Director of Sales Enablement at Varonis. Good afternoon, Stephen, and welcome.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
No, thanks for joining us. Stephen, first of all, thank you again for being brave enough, I should say, to participate with the fireside chat or our interview. Okay. I would like to ask you some questions. And basically, the questions are really just to kind of guide us through some conversation. And we'll just basically talk a little bit about Varonis and your role there and how actually your company is working and dealing with today's environment, if you will, and how basically what you're seeing out there and what we can do to utilize your technology to thwart off the attackers. So first of all, tell us about Varonis as a company and your role as Director of Sales Enablement.
Sure. Well, first I want to say, I'll do anything for a free mug. So thanks for sending me the
cheers,
the security chat mug. So I appreciate that. Just a little bit about Varonis and my background. So Varonis was founded way back in 2005. We actually got our start. Our founder worked for NetApp, and he was working for a company that was mapping the ocean floor out in Angola. They were doing it for like oil surveys, and so they were sending these submerging this equipment and mapping these floors. And of course, each photo that they stored on these NetApp devices were worth an immense amount of money. And one day he showed up to work, and all those photos were gone. So they asked him, do you know where any of these went? No, we don't know where they went. Do you know, okay, well, who would have been able to delete them? Do we know who would have had access to it? Would have been able to do it? No, we don't have that answer either. So he kind of got his start, and what this company was founded on is really getting a better understanding of what this data is, what this sensitive content is. My background, so I run the enablement team and education team here at Varonis. So really my job is making sure the account teams and folks that work in the field for Varonis, the trusted and valued partners we work with, such as yourselves, really understand how the product works, the problems that we solve for our customers, and how to articulate that and how to share that information with them. So thanks a lot for having me today, by the way.
Oh, you're welcome. So I did some research, as I do, and I noticed that you started Varonis actually as a senior sales engineer. And then now you're the Director of Sales Enablement. So tell us a little bit about that transition, if you will.
I think I'm going to take a one step back. My background is I started as a server jockey. So I actually used to do Windows servers and like Citrix remote access and stuff like that. I worked for some of the bigger companies in Minneapolis where I reside. Worked for United Health Group, Target, just to name a couple. U.S. Bank. Spent many years at U.S. Bank. But I had been working as a sales engineer, working as someone helping sell and configure the software. And I came over to Varonis about 5 years ago. So I spent the first couple of years working with some of the big enterprise companies in town, and then had the opportunity to make this transition, which is honestly coming up in a few months. It'll have been 3 years. I can't believe it. Wow. It's like the old line that I heard. It's like, March 2020, man, it's hard to believe that was only 16 years ago. Last 3 years have felt like about 20, but it's been an exceptional role for me. It's a good background from my perspective because I really understood the technology and what it does. And so it's helped me be able to share that information with our account teams and our partners.
Great. That's very interesting. I mean, I started as well many, many years ago, probably before you were born, as a sales engineer. I was decoding protocols. I worked for Network Generals. they made the sniffer analyzer. So that was kind of interesting, believe it or not. And then got into security, and then formed my own
kindred
company.
Spirits is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Spirits, yeah.
Absolutely. So the other day, someone asked me, what's the most unaddressed cybersecurity risks at companies today? Is it people, meaning malicious or negligent, program monitoring, data privacy, basic network security, or third-party risk? What would you say?
I mean, I would say that, there's probably portions of all of that has probably been unaddressed to a certain extent. I mean, you still have issues with people clicking on links. You still have issues with we're not doing a good enough job monitoring. We're not, they're still finding vulnerabilities and security. And of course, there's always issues with, third parties and our interactions with them, what they're doing with their data. But to me, it's absolutely data privacy. If you think about in the last decade and the way things have gone in terms of data, before in the early 2000s and before that, files, emails, that type of thing, that really wasn't much of a concern. A lot of times you had these file systems that were sitting out there and no one really paid any attention to it. No one really tried to do anything about it. And then really over the last 10-ish or so years, we've seen a monetization of these problems. So now you saw things like ransomware, of course, is an easy one where you have a piece of malicious software that goes out and encrypts and stops these files from functioning. And of course, what we see in these organizations, be it a government organization or a regular organization or corporate organization, when that data stops moving, the business stops happening. And therefore, they can end up losing a lot of different revenue from that perspective. But we're also seeing now too, is situations where this data is being leaked and put in the dark web and being sold, or even from a compliance perspective. You start thinking about things like the data privacy regulations, like CCPA, California Consumer Privacy Act, or GDPR, or even things like HIPAA and PCI, these items that if you get this data exposed, ends up costing the business money and fines and reputation and items like this. So realistically, I would say, while it's definitely getting better, it's definitely getting substantially, there's a lot more attention being paid to it. It's still something that's a pretty big blind spot for most organizations, and something that we still talk to organizations every day, and we go through what we call our risk assessment process, and we uncover things they had no idea existed and gaps in their security landscape they had no idea were there before.
Yeah, no, that's very similar again to, like I said, when I started back, looking at communication protocols, right? It was all about visibility. If you can't see it, you can't protect it, right? So if you don't know where your information is, obviously you don't know how exposed you are as a company. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you about Varonis, you guys obviously look for sensitive data, but you look for sensitive data on the on-prem environments and cloud. Do you do it both?
Yeah, obviously, like I mentioned before, we got our start in the on-premise world, but there's been a big focus of ours, and this is not just, with the recent change of times, with COVID and this push to work remotely, but we've always had a focus, particularly on the Microsoft products, because those are the ones that seem to be most prevalently used. So things like SharePoint Online, OneDrive, and of course, Teams, which most people don't know is really more of a client. It's like Outlook is to Exchange, Teams is to SharePoint Online and OneDrive. It's really an interface to leverage those backends. So we have been partnering with Microsoft now for several years to be able to help identify where the sensitive data is, and in both on-premise and in the cloud. But also, too, we've seen that there are patterns and movement of data between those two repositories. I can count on one hand how many organizations I've dealt with that have been entirely 100% in the cloud or entirely 100% on-prem. Everyone seems to have a little bit of both, and data moves between the two of those. So not only is it important for us to know is there sensitive data out there, but who's touching it, what are they doing it, how is the movement going back and forth with it?
Yeah, no, that is definitely important, especially, and you mentioned Teams, which kind of leads me to my next question. So obviously with what's going on around the world with the pandemic, data security is paramount, and especially data that's residing in the public cloud, and Microsoft Teams. I mean, people are using Teams a lot. And so the big question is, do people really know where these files are going when you share them with the Teams channels?
I think the quick answer to that is no. I think what you're seeing today is that you have the ability to, there are abilities out there to what we would call more of a traditional DLP style of protection, which is simply, okay, a file is sensitive. If it's marked as sensitive, then okay, let's not allow someone to share a link. Or a file is sensitive, let's not allow them to email it out. It's kind of that policy-based protections that have been there. This is something that we've known about for quite some time. But what we're seeing is even with these policies in place, that you have many attackers that can get around that. Our Varonis, our forensic investigation team, we've been uncovering all sorts of different types of attacks where people have been bypassing MFA, they've been bypassing conditional access in the Office 365 world. And so, of course, attackers can figure out a way to get through. But there's also the concept of shadow IT as well. Just because you can't or not allowed to share a link directly to an outside world, there's nothing stopping you from sharing it to someone else or another peer within the organization and getting someone else access to the data that shouldn't have it. Like I shouldn't have access to payroll, right? Even though I happen to report to the HR organization, but that doesn't mean I should have access to payroll information. But collaboration tools like this allow us to share things internally. So you not only have the issue of the insider threat, which can be used regardless of whether something is shared externally or not, but you also have when things are shared externally and not as much visibility into who's touching and accessing that. So from a Varonis perspective, we want to make sure we put a spotlight on those types of things, so you can see when people get past those types of perimeters or when shadow IT is abusing and misusing those types.
So yeah, you just brought up something that's kind of interesting. You really, don't know where the data really is. And Office 365 administrators, well, the big challenge for them is, where is the sensitive files and who's sharing them outside of the team channel. So that's been a challenge as well. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, you'll see incidents or issues with people. First off, it's very difficult to know, no two files are created equally either. There's you could have a file that has one credit card number and you could have a file that has 10,000 credit card numbers. And obviously those two files are not created equally. So if you don't have visibility into the concentrations of sensitive data, if you don't have the visibility into your exposure, you can be at risk. It's one thing to know if it's sensitive or not. It's another thing to know the grade of sensitivity. I think what you also mentioned is, talking about knowing when people are accessing shares, knowing people are sharing data. These platforms were built for collaboration. If you're not allowing that collaboration, it's like, what are you using it for? So you want to be able to use that collaboration, but you want to be able to use it safely. So you want to make sure that when people are creating links, particularly on sensitive data, and when those links are being accessed by people who don't normally access them, or from unusual locations, or from the dark web, areas like that, that has to stick out to you right away, so you can investigate and see exactly what happened. So that's the type of visibility that Varonis brings into play with that.
And so, from what I understand, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Teams stores data in a lot of different places because, again, like you say, it's a front end for multiple pieces of the Microsoft cloud world. And so I can imagine that administrators are just going out of their minds, not only trying to find where the data is, but securing it. So how can organizations leverage a product like Varonis to help them find and secure that data that's stored all over the place in Teams?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely a great point. Teams itself, it's not necessarily storing it in a lot of different types of background, it's really only storing in, SharePoint Online and OneDrive. But I mean, a single team site, one team site alone can create multiple SharePoint sites that have to, you have to have some visibility into. You have to know what's going out there, what data there is. And look, this tool was designed specifically to make it easier on IT. You want to take the complexity out of IT's hands and really pass it off to the user. So you don't need to worry about provisioning a new team site every time somebody wants it or anything like that. But the downside of that is, a single team site, creates a new SharePoint site. If you add private channels, that creates an additional new SharePoint site. You can have up to 30 different unique SharePoint sites per team. And as an example, inside Varonis, we're about a 1,500 person organization. We have probably over 1,000 teams already inside our organization from doing this for just the different purposes that we're using, all of which are containing data. And so if you don't have a visibility into the amount of sites that you have, the amount of teams that you have, which ones contain sensitive data, very, very important, which ones have concentrations of sensitive data, and then on top of it, who has access to that information and what they're doing with it, you can have a really big blind spot because, again, they're built for collaboration. So they're built to help you spread this data around. They're built to help you share it with people. Without that visibility, could be in a tough spot potentially.
Now, let me ask you a question, because one of the ways that my company years ago was introduced to Varonis was we were actually sitting in front of a customer. And this was when ransomware just really kind of started out. And so one of the things that they were telling us when we were talking to them was that they had experienced a form of ransomware back then. And I said, well, what did you do? He said, well, I could tell you one thing, we were very lucky. And I said, why were you very lucky? He said, because we actually had a product that was able to show us what was going on with our files.
Sure.
And who was accessing them. I said, well, what product was that? He said, Varonis. I said, I got to look into that. And so lo and behold, that's how we found Varonis, believe it or not. So today with what's going on with ransomware, and we're seeing more and more of that, we're seeing a lot of companies actually, unfortunately, paying a lot of money because they're attacked and been exposed to ransomware. What is it that they should have been doing? And, how would Varonis be able to help them?
So, yeah, I mean, honestly, it's that type of visibility that got us our start. We started to realize, customers were, in the really early days, customers were saying, hey, we saw this behavior and we figured out, we're hit by ransomware. We used Varonis to go figure out all the different files that it touched. And we realized we had all this behavior just sitting in our system. We had every single file touch that a user ever did. And it allowed us to start going, how can we be more proactive with identifying these threats and stopping them in their tracks? So our first step was ransomware. Ransomware is pretty simple. It's loud, it's noisy, it wants to be caught. It wants you to know it's there. So right away in the early days, we were able to put in what we call threat models to be able to look for certain patterns, like look for a known ransomware extension, like those types of things, those kind of signature based. But then we said, well, why can't we do this from a behavior? So why can't we see if a user is encrypting files? If a user starts encrypting a bunch of files, that's ransomware. Like a user doesn't go and just decrypt a bunch of files just for fun. And so we started looking at more behavioral patterns. And what we realized is that we were basically sitting on a gold mine, that you can have, because we know what a normal behavior is for a user. I know, for example, how many files you encrypt in a day. So if you encrypt, substantially more than that threshold, we're going to be able to alert, notify you, sever the account, log off, shut down the machine, do all the types of responses that you want. On top of that, we also know how many files you touch in a day just normally. So knowing that, as I like to tell the story, Bob from accounting accesses the same 2 spreadsheets every day in and day out. This is what he does to manage the numbers, the books for the company. All of a sudden, Bob grabs 150 files that he has access to, but he's never accessed before. Those are the types of things that Varonis alerts and informs you about, so you know how to go in and investigate and stop those types of things in their tracks.
So you go way beyond DLP then. With the Varonis, which is great. I mean, DLP is good because It helps protect, against files that you don't want, that has sensitive information, going outside of your network. But at the same time, again, who's accessing those files is very important. And that's kind of what you're doing. Tell me a little bit about the architecture of Varonis. When a company, wants to implement it, how does it all work?
Sure. I want to make one comment about the DLP thing first, and then
Sure.
I'll talk to a little bit about the architecture too. But because you bring up a really great point, one of the things that's drew me to Varonis when I first came here, and is what's why I'm still here and why I'm such a believer in this organization, is because I think Varonis is one of the first companies that has moved past this traditional perimeter idea that all of our protection needs to be at the perimeter, like a DLP or like a firewall. Varonis is one of the first of its kind to say, let's look at all the behavior inside on the most important things. So let's look at all the behavior in the data internally in the network. Now, we've recently expanded, and I'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about architecture. We now do look at perimeter devices to look at the behavior. So as an example, we will look at the behavior in a VPN. So I know that this person always VPNs in from Canada, and then they come in and access these files. And then, these are the websites they interact with. So I know if they VPN from North Korea, access data they don't normally touch, and then upload it to a Gmail site, that's the type of thing that we're going to look for. So a little bit about the architecture. So we have always been a Windows-based architecture. We do this for a very specific reason. Because of what we're looking at, and because we are a security product, we want the customer to be able to have the option to have it be entirely contained within their organization. So they don't have to send anything back to some Varonis cloud provider or something like that. All that data is kept within house. And we even go a step further, because while we do help you identify where sensitive data is, we store none of that sensitive information inside our system. Very good. It actually, we scan, we look at these files, but I don't actually, the last thing I want to do is create another copy of a social security number for you and make your problem worse. And so our infrastructure has been built around a Windows architecture, but we set it up to be scalable to meet the needs of our, the large customers we have. We got our start with the big financials in New York, which is where we're based. And so we're used to having to deal with, hundreds of terabytes to petabytes worth of data. We're used to having to deal with tens to hundreds of thousands of users. And so we built a solution that the more you want to look at, the more, data centers, the more data you want to look at, we just add additional servers, horsepower, compute, so we can accommodate that. So it's a pretty basic, 3-tier architecture. We have a database backend, we have a Windows base. And actually, for the most part, we're agentless, though we did build an agent to use on Windows devices. We found that Windows auditing was not sufficient for our needs. So we built an agent that does run on Windows devices, but pretty much anything else, it's agentless.
Okay. And then how do you integrate in the cloud?
Great question. So depending, if we're talking about from an Office 365 perspective, we're just going to look at that from the inside of the confines of your network, and we'll just go out and talk to the cloud directly from there. If you have a customer that has their infrastructure in the cloud, like say Azure or something like that, we'll just prop it up right next to it in Azure. We can just build it just in that environment, just like they do.
Okay. Got you. And so Mac devices, things that are non-Windows, can you deal with those? Can you protect those or look at those?
Well, see, this is kind of one of the best parts of so we don't have an agent that you have to put on an endpoint.
Okay.
So we're going to see, the authentication and the events because we're looking at the file repository itself. If somebody connects from a Mac or connects from a Windows device, it doesn't really matter. We're going to see that Active Directory authentication, and we're going to see them actually touch and access the file. So we don't have to put we don't have to put an agent on anything, and it really doesn't matter what device you're accessing from. We're going to be able to see that behavior.
So you bring up Active Directory.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading you guys actually leverage Active Directory to enhance the visibility as well on the data, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So it's the same type of thing I mentioned before, how we're doing the perimeter. We also, Active Directory was something we looked at very early on. And the reason why we do it is because we want to be able to see, not only the account, but what devices are accessing this data. So from an Active Directory perspective, we actually go out and we will automatically identify all your service accounts, all your admin accounts, all your executive accounts, as well as your regular user accounts. And then we go through the process of actually assigning them their normal computers. So as an example, I log in from the same laptop, sitting right over here on my desk every single day. So in the Varonis system, it is said that Stephen's Active Directory account is attached to this device. So that way, I'm always on the expectation that Stephen logs into this computer and accesses this data. So if I break that chain somewhere, Stephen now logs over to this computer and then accesses the data. That's going to throw up a red flag. Or an even bigger flag would be Stephen resets a password, logs into a different machine, and then accesses data he doesn't normally touch. That's a huge red flag and something that we'll alert on. So Active Directory becomes very critical in that. It's also very important to, when you're doing investigations, we want to be able to see the full picture. Again, what I mentioned before, I want to know how someone's coming in from the outside world to the VPN. I want to know what devices they're authenticating to. I want to know what data that they touch. And I want to know if they exfiltrated that data either to a website or maybe some more sophisticated type of exfiltration like DNS tunneling. So this allows us to have all that information in one place. So the Active Directory activity, the VPN, the data, everything, one spot, easy to see, easy for a security professional to be able to investigate and respond to a threat accordingly.
Yeah, no, I like what you're saying about the VPN, because obviously with the transition that people have been going through and companies have been going through these days, where you're basically taking people that normally work on the inside and now they're working from home or other places, and they're actually using a VPN, to connect into the resources in the office. And so that's kind of interesting how you guys can, detect that and look inside and still watch it, what's going on as far as that's concerned.
Yeah, we added that in. We've probably been looking at these. It's been well over a year. So when we added this in, it really took off for us. Of course, around the March timeframe. As one CISO I was talking to, he's like, a couple of weeks ago, I had to worry about 3 remote locations, and now I need to worry about 3,000 of them.
Sure.
It's a completely big shift. One of the things that I'm actually very proud of our organization for doing is during that time, for the March, April timeframe, we actually allowed our customers to turn on our VPN monitoring, turn on our, and actually prospects too, turn on our VPN, proxy, and DNS monitoring, so they could see what the traffic is that was going in and out. And we saw just a whole host of crazy things that we saw. There was one woman that we were working with who was working out of her home, and she had been connecting to a public Wi-Fi that was at a coffee shop across the street, and had gotten a dropper placed on her machine. And our incident response team was able to catch on to something like that. We had another customer that we were dealing with that literally blew open SIF shares. Like they had to move to remote over a week. They were not a very mature IT organization, and they opened up their file share to the outside world. It boggles my mind, some of the things that we saw, but we were able to help a lot of those organizations, with some best practices and help them get that repaired, so they could go through this adjustment, maybe, ramp up the amount of VPN products that they needed to be able to support the business. We, of course, we're willing to help them too if they want to secure any of their data sets or anything like that during that time as well. But I was very proud of our organization during that time that we were offering that free help. I will say it's still something that we're offering for free today. So if there's any folks that from your customers that you have that want to take advantage of that and see what's going on, how people are connecting in through the VPN, we're happy to provide those insights.
No, that's very cool. No, I know that when COVID kind of started back in March, that I was in contact with our reps from Varonis, and they were showing me a little bit about some of those things that you guys were offering for free that people can definitely get and experience on a trial basis. You did intrigue me a little bit about the DNS monitoring. Can you talk about that, how that works?
Yeah, that's what we added in, like I said, along with VPN and proxy, because what we're seeing is that DNS is it's like a tale as old as time, right? It's a communication protocol that's been there forever. It works for what it's supposed to do. If I type in google.com, the DNS server will give me a set of numbers, and now I know how to get there. The problem with DNS is that it is something that attackers take advantage of all the time. It's almost always allowed in and out of a network, right? It's easy to take advantage of it, to poison it. And so we'll see things like what's called DNS tunneling, where people actually hide information within DNS packets and will send it out to their DNS server. Or what we're seeing more and more often now is actually the reverse, where they're actually hiding commands, command and control inside of DNS traffic, and using an external DNS server that they control, sending these commands in to remotely control malware, some of the more sophisticated types of malware that we're seeing now. So this was something that we wanted to add in, and we apply the same concepts that we do, like I was talking about earlier with data. I know exactly how many DNS queries you make in a day. I know which DNS servers that you're talking to, which ones are normal. So if we start seeing queries to unusual DNS servers, known blacklisted locations, if your DNS information all of a sudden spikes, becomes 10,000 times what it was before, all of these things can be indicators that your machine could be compromised, and it's something that's going to throw a red flag in our system.
And I know that one of my customers that owns Varonis, one of the things you guys do excellent job with, I can just give you kudos all day long, is the the monthly powwows, if you want to call it that.
Sure.
Where you're touching always the customer, you're kind of helping them understand a little bit about what they're experiencing, what Varonis is finding on their network, and what's going on in their network. And one of the things with this one customer was the Active Directory activity that they really didn't understand was going on, that you guys were actually seeing logins from all over the world with a particular account, and so that was very cool as well. So if you want to talk a little bit about how you guys do that as well.
Sure.
Another feature, I'm assuming.
Well, we've put a lot of things in place over the last couple of years. I've mentioned this one already, but our incident response team. So we built a completely complementary incident response team for Varonis customers and prospects too, to be honest, where if you get an alert, if you have a problem, if you see an unusual activity, you can reach out to that incident response team. We will put one of our trained forensic investigators on the phone with you, and they will work until they figure out what happened. And what I love about this too is this is not limited to just what's going on within the Varonis environment. They'll unpack workstation logs if they need to and everything to try to figure out what happened. Through this, we have actually caught quite a few different strains. And we've been talking a lot about the resurgence of Emotet was a big one. There was I'm blanking on the name right now, but there was a pay load downloader that basically downloaded financial transactions. I don't know why I can't think of the name right now. That's one we discovered last year. Maybe I'll send you the link and you can include it in this, and just have some sympathy for an old man and his memory. And then another part of this too is we've instituted this, how many times you need to interface with a customer from your representative. So we now have, the customer success managers that are reaching out on a periodic basis. We go through quarterly reviews, right, where we look at all the progress you've made with your data. We'll review any alerts, any investigations we had to do. If there's any, of course, any open incidents, or if you need to get on the latest version of the software. And so we do that on a quarterly basis. We've really made, not that we weren't customer focused before, but I really think over the last year or two, we've taken this to the next level. And on top of that too, we also have the ability, and this is something that we've added in just recently, is we do now have the ability for the Varonis system to make a secure communication back to the Varonis mothership, if you will. No sensitive information is sent across. It's all just information, relevant information out of the logs. But we're actually now proactively reaching out to our customers. So if we see an unusual piece of behavior, if we see something that would have triggered an alert, we'll proactively reach out to you and say, hey, we think you need to take a look at this. So even if someone just happened to be asleep at the wheel at that one moment, we'll make sure that it doesn't get past you.
And this is just for being a Varonis customer. I mean, free of charge? Wow.
Free of charge. Everything that I mentioned, we offer. Yep.
That is very, very awesome. Definitely. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about how Varonis can help an organization reduce the attack surface and detect some anomalous behavior that's going on in their environments.
Sure. First thing I would mention is that we have pushed to put a lot of automation in our platform, knowing that we're dealing with such large data sets where sometimes we're dealing with hundreds to thousands of terabytes of data. We would sometimes come up with these proposals where we're literally, talking to a customer, and we think it'll take us about 1,300 days to be able to fix this for you, just because of the immense amount of data that some of these organizations had. So out of that, we built automated capabilities that can say, okay, we found a folder that is open to every person in the organization. We can analyze the activity and say, okay, out of that, 10,000 employees, only these 50 people use it on a regular basis. Let's clean up that access. We'll create new groups. We'll apply this and use that to significantly reduce the attack footprint. If you think about it, if you have a folder that contains sensitive data, you go from open to 10,000 people, the entire company, to 10 or 50. That's a huge decrease in your attack surface. Obviously, this is the first step. We go beyond that. We help you figure out of those 50, should they be there? But even that is such a huge reduction of your attack footprint. So this is something we automated that, where previously that might take you, many hours per folder. We can now do thousands of folders per minute instead, which has been a huge help to a lot of our customers. In terms of abnormal behavior, everything that I've talked about so far is fed into our machine learning. So the behavior in the VPN, the behavior in Active Directory, the behavior in the data sets, the behavior in Office 365, the behavior in proxy, DNS, all of this is fed into our machine learning algorithms. And so we know exactly what a normal behavior is. As I mentioned before, like where you're connecting from the VPN, what data you're touching, what workstations you log into, where your account goes, what you do in Exchange, what you do with Office 365, what websites you interact with. All of this creates a peacetime profile for a user. And we will set off alerts for that based on the deviation of the behavior. Because you going to an unusual website, that might not be anything. That's, people go to new websites from time to time, maybe even to a blacklisted website. Like I keep getting yelled at because I'm a poker player. So at work, we don't allow a poker website. So I get flagged every once in a while for something like that. But again, the more the deviation we see, so if we see somebody, they logged in from a weird geographical location, they accessed an unusual amount of data, they had communication with the DNS server using unusual accounts, and then they exfiltrated data out to a Dropbox website. That makes it go from one small deviation, maybe a small informational alert, to big, huge red flag bells going off. You need to look at this now. So that is what we do with our behavioral analytics and machine learning.
Very cool. Let me ask you a question. Horror stories. We're in October. Halloween's around the corner. Okay, I'm sure you have some horror stories. Why don't you tell us one that you guys have discovered with a customer that basically either didn't have Varonis and should have, or did have Varonis and you're able to help them out?
Oh, man. Well, I would definitely want to say a big warning to everyone out there that if you don't know about Emotet and Ryuk, that you should be doing some research into it. We were just working with a hospital organization out in Omaha, and this was such a big major attack for them that they immediately reached out to every other CISO in the territory. So if you haven't heard about it, I'm kind of surprised at this point. You probably have, but make sure you do some research with it. From that perspective, the research we've been looking into it, our forensics investigation team, we're seeing old software that people are repurposing, and it's becoming just a lot more intelligent. There's no more just one type of attack. It's not one attempt to leave a dropper. Now it's multiple different ways to try to penetrate. So if you run that file with a macro that's sneaking past, endpoint detection, that it's going to have 3 or 4 different ways to try to infiltrate your system. And you might have systems that catch 1 or 2, but not all of them. So we're seeing these attacks be very, very successful. They're also using, hosts or lists of pre-compromised hosts. And this new thing, I should say it's not new, but we're seeing it more prevalent, of thread harvesting, where they get control of your email system or they get information from your email system. And so when they're sending this phishing attack, they're literally replying to a thread that your boss sent.
Wow.
As them. And so it's, not only is it really, are the systems having trouble detecting these different types of malware, but it's even the most well-trained security professionals are getting fooled. And with things like the election going on right now, it's a huge, massive increase of emails coming from the RNC or DNC, depending on which way your political ideologies fall. But they're trying to trick everybody. They're not isolating one particular group, and it's working. So that's something that definitely has been, if you want to talk about scary thing that we're talking about right now. This is something, again, if you have any concerns about this, we do have the ability to look into your system and see, post fact, was there some sort of compromise? So, reach out, let us know. The other one I think I'll tell is my favorite story, or one of my favorite stories about, just because this works with, you can appreciate this working for a value reseller such as yourself. There was an organization we were working with up in the Pac Northwest, and a gentleman left the company to go form his own company. Okay. And this was I won't say exactly what it was, but it was a similar type of thing. It was a reseller type of organization. And before he left, he created a service account in Exchange and Office 365 and left himself access. Not a huge company, but big enough. And he was going in and reading the COO's emails and CFO's emails, seeing the bids that they were proposing and undercutting them.
Wow.
So can you imagine that? Like this is like one of my old customers was great big construction company. Like they built stadiums. Imagine if your bids are worth $1 billion. Like, right, football stadiums cost about $1 billion these days. What if another company could get a hold of that bid and then bid $990 million? That's going to cost you $1 billion. So
yeah,
those types of
scary
attacks. Yeah, and so that's the thing. It's like it's not always that sophisticated. Sometimes it's just somebody leaving themselves a back door.
Yeah, no, I mean, there was a story, I think I read about it last year, where, one beer company planted somebody in their competitor's beer company to literally steal the recipe. I won't say what beer companies, but I'm sure if you do the research,
you'll figure
it out. So yeah, it's intellectual property, secret recipes. Just ask the colonel, those are things that, can make or break you.
Oh yeah. Panama Papers. That was a big one.
Absolutely.
Do you think any of those clients came back?
No, not at all. Well, Stephen, I appreciate your time today. I think we're coming up on the end of our session, and thank you again for joining us. It was very informative. If there's anything you want to share additional to our users, our watchers and our listeners, please feel free to go ahead and do so before we wrap it up.
I just mentioned one quick thing because I think I'd probably get yelled at if I didn't mention this. I know I talked a little bit about it before, but Varonis is one of the things we're really well known for is our complementary risk assessments, which we do with our valued partners. So it's something that is completely complimentary for you. Most, if you go to one of the big four or something like that, they charge a lot of money for these types of assessments of your data and your risk footprint and things in like Active Directory. It's something that's just part of our business model, and we do it for you completely complimentary. So if you have any, curiosity about it, reach out to your account manager, and hopefully we'll talk again in person at some point.
No, absolutely. And again, as Stephen said, that's complimentary. Customers of Sinnott Wolach Technology Group or folks that are watching, please feel free to contact us, and we'll make sure that we can work with the Varonis team and set up that assessment for you. Again, Stephen, thank you very much. It was a pleasure meeting you and talking with you today. And thank you very much, and appreciate you joining Let's Talk Security.
Thanks for the mug.
Thank you everyone for watching. We hope you enjoyed today's webinar. Check out our YouTube channel for previous Let's Talk Security broadcasts. Just go to youtube.com and search for Sinnott Wolach Technology Group. This episode is sponsored by Varonis, your data, our mission, and produced by Events by Drew Productions. Let's Talk Security is brought to you by Sinnott Wolach Technology Group, a leading provider of next-generation network and information security solutions and services.